I wasn't supposed to work that night. It was a Wednesday in early spring, the kind of damp, gray evening where the sidewalks stay wet for hours after the rain stops. My coworker called in sick, and my manager texted me asking if I could cover. I almost said no. I had plans to finally catch up on a show I'd been binging, but rent doesn't pay itself, so I threw on my black polo and headed to the cafe. The place was nearly empty when I got there, just the hiss of the espresso machine and the low hum of indie music from the speakers. That's when I noticed him, sitting by the window with a sketchbook open, head bent, pen moving fast. I'd never seen him before, but he didn't look like a random walk-in, more like someone who belonged there, comfortable, settled, like the cafe was part of his routine. He had dark hair that curled a little at the ends, a few days, worth of stubble, and the kind of posture that said he was so wrapped up in whatever he was working on that the rest of the world didn't exist. When I walked past to wipe a nearby table, he glanced up, just a second of eye contact, warm brown eyes, a tiny half smile, and then he went back to drawing. For the next hour, I kept catching myself looking over at him. Not in an obvious way, at least I hoped, but enough that I started wondering what he was sketching. Around 8, he came to the counter. Up close, he was taller than I'd guessed, broad-shouldered under a worn gray hoodie. He slid his empty mug toward me. "Can I get another cappuccino?" And, do you guys have those almond croissants left? His voice was low, smooth, and I felt my stupid pulse jump. "Yeah, last one," I said, pulling it from the display case. When I handed him the cup and plate, his fingers brushed mine. Nothing deliberate, just a casual pass. But it was enough to make me hyper-aware of every nerve in my hand. "Thanks," he said, and then, after a beat, "You work here often? I'm here most nights, but I don't think I've seen you." "Usually mornings," I said. "This is a one-off, covering for someone." He smiled like that was good news. "Guess I got lucky then." And just like that, he walked back to his table, leaving me standing there with my face way warmer than it had any right to be. I didn't know it yet, but that one shift was about to change my entire routine, and not because of the extra hours. He stayed until almost closing, which isn't unusual. We get plenty of night owls nursing their laptops until we start stacking chairs, but he wasn't working the whole time. Every so often, I'd feel his eyes on me, and when I glanced over, he wouldn't look away right away. By 9:30, the only customers left were him and a guy buried in a textbook near the back. I wiped the counter for the 3rd time that hour, partly to look busy, partly because my brain wouldn't stop replaying the way he'd said, "Guess I got lucky." When I announced last call, he didn't pack up right away. Instead, he waited until the student left, then came to the counter with his cup and plate. "You guys closing now?" he asked, like maybe I'd make an exception for him. "Yeah, but I can give you a to-go cup if you want to hang out for a bit," I said. I don't know why I offered. We weren't supposed to encourage lingering after hours, but something in his half smile made me bend the rules without thinking. "Nah," he said. "I've kept you long enough." He hesitated, then rested his hand on the counter, fingers drumming lightly. "You free after this?" My brain stalled for a second. Yeah. I mean, I'm just heading home." "Good. You should come for a walk," he said. It's finally stopped raining. I must have looked hesitant because he added, "Not trying to make it weird. Just been sitting for hours. Could use some company." I told myself it was no big deal, just a friendly walk. Still, my hands moved faster as I finished my closing duties. 10 minutes later, I was locking the door behind us, the streetlights reflecting off wet pavement. He introduced himself as Mateo. We fell into step without thinking, heading toward the park 2 blocks over. It was quiet except for the squish of our shoes and the occasional car hissing by. "You're not from here, are you?" he asked after a while. "Grew up 2 towns over. You?" "Moved here last fall. Kinda still figuring the place out." We ended up on a bench near the pond, the air cool and damp. He leaned back, one arm resting along the back of the bench, close enough that if I shifted just a little, his fingers would brush my shoulder. "You always work like that?" he asked. "Like what?" "Focused, but watching everything. It's like you're part of the place, not just passing through." I laughed quietly. "Guess I've been here too long." He studied me for a second, then said, Nah, I think you just notice things most people miss. I was about to deflect with a joke, but he didn't look away, and the weight of his gaze made my chest feel tight. Something shifted then. The air, the distance between us, and I realized I wasn't ready for him to leave when the night ended. The park was quiet enough that I could hear the faint ripple of water from the pond. Mateo's arms stayed draped casually along the back of the bench, but it felt deliberate, like he'd put it there, knowing exactly how close it was to me. I shifted slightly, leaning back. The fabric of his sleeve brushed my shoulder. Light, barely there, but it was enough to send a little spark down my spine. I told myself not to read too much into it, but the way he didn't move made it hard to believe it was accidental. So he said, eyes still on me, "Do you ever do anything after work? Or do you just go home and crash?" "Usually just crash," I admitted. "My life's not exactly thrilling after midnight." "That's a shame," he said, smirking faintly. "You seem like you'd be good company." I wasn't sure how to respond to that. "What makes you think that?" "Just a feeling," he said. "You've got this energy, like you're holding something back." I looked away, partly to hide the heat creeping into my face. "That's vague." "Maybe," he said, "but I'm usually right about people." For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could feel the weight of his gaze, steady and unflinching, and it made me hyper-aware of the inches between us. I heard myself say, "And what do you think I'm holding back?" He tilted his head slightly, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Guess I'd have to stick around and find out." The air felt heavier then, in that way where you're not sure if you've crossed a line or if you're just teetering on the edge of it. He didn't move closer, but the stillness between us was louder than any conversation we'd had. A breeze rustled the trees, and I realized I was leaning ever so slightly toward him without meaning to. He noticed. I could tell from the way his eyes flicked briefly to my mouth before coming back up. I wasn't used to someone looking at me like that. Not in a long time. Mateo broke the silence first. "It's late," he said, though his voice was low, almost reluctant. "I should probably head home." I nodded, but neither of us moved right away. Finally, he stood, shoving his hands in his hoodie pocket. "You working again this week?" "Friday morning," I said. He smiled. "Maybe I'll have to be a morning person for once." We walked back toward the cafe in comfortable quiet, our steps in sync. At the corner, he stopped. "This was good," he said. "See you soon?" "Yeah," I said, and I meant it more than I expected. He gave me one last look, that same, almost smile, like he knew something I didn't, and then he turned down the street, disappearing into the soft glow of the streetlights. I stood there for a few seconds longer than I needed to, trying to decide if I was imagining the shift in the air between us, or if tonight had just been the start of something. Friday mornings at the cafe are usually chaos. Office people grabbing lattes before their trains, students half awake and panicking over deadlines, regulars staking out their tables like they're reserving territory for the day. I was in the middle of pulling a double shot when the door chimed, and there he was, Mateo. I almost didn't recognize him at first. The hoodie was gone, replaced by a fitted denim jacket over a black tee, and his hair was a little neater, like he'd actually tried this morning. He scanned the room, spotted me behind the counter, and that grin appeared. The same one from Wednesday night. I forced myself to keep moving, tamping the espresso like my pulse wasn't suddenly louder than the milk steamer. "Morning," he said when he reached the register. "Didn't think you'd actually show up this early," I said, trying to sound casual while also wondering if my coworkers could hear the shift in my voice. "I'm a man of my word," he said, leaning on the counter just enough to close the space between us. "Besides, I wanted to see if you looked different in daylight." I rolled my eyes, but it didn't stop the corner of my mouth from twitching upward. "And?" He tilted his head, like he was evaluating a piece of art. "You do, but I'll keep the details to myself." One of my coworkers, Ellie, appeared beside me to grab a stack of cups, and I could feel her glance between us before she disappeared into the back with a smirk. Great. Mateo ordered a cappuccino, again, and a blueberry muffin this time. When I handed them over, he didn't take the bag right away. Instead, his fingers tapped lightly on the counter. You on break anytime soon? He asked. Not for another hour, I said. That's fine, I'll wait. I opened my mouth to tell him he didn't have to, but he was already moving toward the corner table by the window, the same one from Wednesday. He pulled out his sketchbook and started drawing like he had all the time in the world. For the next hour, every time I glanced over, he was either looking down at the page or, more often than not, at me. Never for long, just enough to catch my attention before looking away again. It was distracting in a way that made my chest feel tight, and I hated how much I didn't hate it. When my break finally came, I grabbed my own coffee and slid into the seat across from him. Still drawing me? I asked, nodding toward the sketchbook. He smirked, flipping the page over so I couldn't see. Maybe. You'll find out when it's finished. I leaned back in my chair, studying him. You're persistent, you know that? Only when I think it's worth it, he said, and there was no mistaking the way he was looking at me now, like we'd picked up exactly where Wednesday night left off, except the air between us was warmer this time. We sat there for a few minutes sipping our coffees, the hum of the cafe filling the space between us. Mateo's sketchbook was still flipped shut, one hand resting on it like he was guarding a secret. So, I said, finally breaking the quiet, are you gonna tell me why you're actually here? I mean, it's not like this place is famous or anything, he smiled faintly. Maybe I like it because it's not famous. Or maybe it's because you're here. I tried to play it off with a scoff, but my throat felt dry. You barely know me. Yet, he said, leaning back in his chair. That's fixable. Before I could figure out what to say, he glanced at the clock on the wall. When's your shift over? 2, I said. Perfect, he replied, like he'd just confirmed something in his head. There's this place I want to take you. Not far. I narrowed my eyes. You're not going to tell me what it is? Nope, he said, grinning. You'll either love it or hate it, but either way you'll remember it. You're awfully confident for someone who's known me, 2 days? He shrugged. I'm a good judge of people, and you strike me as someone who needs to get out of their routine. I didn't answer right away, partly because he wasn't wrong. Most of my life lately had been work-home repeat, with the occasional grocery store trip as my big outing. Mateo must have seen something shift in my expression because he said, Don't overthink it. Just meet me out front when you're done. Then he stood, slid the muffin wrapper into the trash, and tapped the top of his sketchbook. See you at 2. He left without waiting for me to agree, but I already knew I would. The next few hours crawled by, every coffee order and pastry restock, dragging me closer to whatever Mateo had planned. I caught myself wondering what not far meant, what kind of place he thought I'd remember, and why the thought of finding out made my stomach twist in a way that wasn't entirely nerves. By the time my shift ended, the clouds had burned off and the sunlight was spilling through the front windows. I stepped outside, scanning the sidewalk, and there he was, leaning against a lamppost, denim jacket catching the light, like he'd been standing there long enough to make waiting look easy. Ready? He asked. I nodded, even though I still had no idea what I was agreeing to. Mateo didn't explain right away. He just started walking, hands in his jacket pockets, and I fell into step beside him. The late afternoon light made everything feel warmer than it really was, the kind of early spring sun that tricks you into thinking it's almost summer. We cut through a few side streets I didn't usually take, the kind lined with small record shops, old bookstores, and the kind of thrift stores that always smell faintly like the 70s. Mateo kept the pace unhurried, glancing over now and then, like he was making sure I was still with him. You trust me? He asked suddenly. Not sure yet, I said, but I was smiling. Fair, he replied, but you're still walking with me. We rounded a corner, and that's when I saw it. A narrow alley between 2 brick buildings, the kind you'd never notice unless someone pointed it out. Mateo stopped at the entrance. It's down here, he said. I raised an eyebrow. You're aware this is how horror movies start, right? He smirked. If I was gonna murder you, I'd at least buy you dinner first. Rolling my eyes, I followed him. The alley opened up into a small courtyard, tucked away from the street. Half garden, half patio, strung with warm yellow lights, even though the sun was still up. At the far end was a tiny cafe-bar hybrid, with mismatched tables, old couches, and plants in every possible corner. "Welcome to my favorite place in the city," Mateo said. "Best coffee after dark, and they do these small plate dinners that'll ruin every chain restaurant for you." It was quieter than I expected, just a handful of people scattered around. We grabbed a table near the back, the kind that wobbled slightly when you leaned on it. "I come here when I need to think," he said, shrugging out of his jacket. "Or when I want to be around people without actually talking to them. But," he met my eyes. "Figured this time I'd make an exception." We ordered coffee for me, something herbal for him, plus a plate of bread and cheese to share. The conversation slipped into that easy rhythm again, like we were picking up threads from Wednesday and Friday without realizing it. At one point, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You're different outside the cafe." "How so?" I asked. "Less guarded," he said simply, like you're not watching yourself so much. That stuck with me, partly because it was true, partly because I hadn't expected him to notice. By the time the plates were empty and the sky outside had turned indigo, I realized I hadn't thought about what time it was in over an hour. It wasn't until we stood to leave that I noticed how close we were standing. Close enough that his shoulder brushed mine as we moved toward the door, neither of us stepping away. Outside, the lights in the courtyard gave everything a soft glow, and for a second, it felt like we were the only two people left in the city. We lingered just outside the courtyard, the hum of the city softened by the walls around us. Mateo didn't start walking right away. Instead, he looked up at the string lights overhead, then back at me with that same quiet, knowing expression I'd seen on Wednesday night. "You're not in a rush, are you?" he asked. I shook my head. "No." "Good," he said, stepping just a little closer. It wasn't dramatic. No sudden lunge, no cliché movie moment, but the space between us tightened in a way that made my pulse pick up. I could smell the faint scent of his tea on his breath, feel the warmth radiating off him in the cool air. "You ever get the feeling you've known someone longer than you actually have?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. "Yeah, sometimes." "That's what this feels like," he said, his voice softer now. For a second, I wasn't sure if I was supposed to say something back. My mind was busy cataloging everything, the way his hand brushed mine as we shifted our weight, the way he didn't look away when our eyes met, the faint upward curve at the corner of his mouth like he was giving me time to catch up. And then, without any more preamble, his fingers hooked lightly around my wrist, not pulling me anywhere, just holding, testing. My breath caught and I didn't move away. "Okay," he asked, and there was something in his tone. Not playful this time, but real, careful. "Yeah," I said, my voice lower than I expected. The hold on my wrist loosened, but instead of letting go, he let his hands slide down until our fingers touched, then curled around them. The contact was simple, nothing anyone else would think twice about, but it carried more weight than it should have. We stood there like that for a moment, hands linked loosely, the night air cool against the parts of me that weren't humming with awareness. "I should walk you home," he said eventually, but he didn't move yet, and I realized I didn't want him to. We finally started moving, slow enough that the walk felt like its own excuse to keep talking. Our joined hands loosened as we stepped out of the courtyard, but he didn't let go completely, just shifted his grip so our knuckles brushed now and then. The streets were calmer at this hour, the shop windows glowing in patches of warm light. Every time we passed under a street lamp, I caught glimpses of him in profile, the way his eyes narrowed slightly when he smiled, the way his jaw tightened when he was thinking about something he didn't say out loud. "So," I said, "do you make a habit of pulling random cafe workers into back alley courtyards?" "Only the ones who notice things," he replied. I laughed under my breath, still vague. "You'd be bored if I gave you all the details at once," he said, glancing at me. "Besides, mystery keeps people coming back." By the time we reached my street, the night felt softer, quieter. We stopped outside my building, the dim lobby light spilling onto the sidewalk. Neither of us made a move to end it. "You heading back now?" I asked. "I could," he said, and then after a beat. "Or I could come up for a bit, if you're okay with that." It was a simple offer, not dressed up as anything else. Still, my heart kicked harder. I thought about my apartment, the unwashed mugs in the sink, the blanket thrown crookedly over the couch, and realized none of it mattered. "Yeah," I said. "Come up." We went inside without saying much, the sound of our footsteps echoing in the empty stairwell. My apartment looked exactly as I'd left it that morning. Not a disaster, but lived in enough to remind me I hadn't expected company. Mateo stepped inside, glancing around like he was taking in more than just the furniture. "Nice place," he said, dropping into the corner of the couch like he'd been there before. I kicked off my shoes and joined him, leaving just enough space that I could still pretend it was casual. We talked for a while about music, about the weirdest customers we'd ever dealt with, about nothing and everything. The longer he was there, the easier it was to forget. This was only the third time we'd seen each other. At some point, there was a pause. Not awkward, just loaded. His arm was stretched along the back of the couch again, close enough that I could feel the heat from it. "This is the part," he said quietly, "where I should probably ask if I can kiss you." I looked at him, searching for the joke, but there wasn't one. "Yeah," I said, before I could think myself out of it. He shifted closer, slow enough that I could have stopped him if I wanted to. I didn't. The first touch of his mouth was light, tentative, like he was giving me room to change my mind. But when I leaned in, he deepened it. Still unhurried, still careful, but enough to make my chest tighten. When we finally pulled back, neither of us moved far. "Guess that mystery thing worked," I said, my voice quieter than I expected. He smiled, just a little. "Told you I was a good judge of people." We didn't rush whatever was next, but in that moment, with the city outside muted and the air between us warm, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever this was, we'd both just stepped past the point of pretending it was nothing.